water are interconnected. When our streams are cleaned up, it can be very, very expensive and difficult. They state that experience has shown that this cleanup process can take anywhere from several years to many decades, depending on the conditions at the site. Sometimes, however, depending on the type of contamination, the groundwater cannot be restored. Next. Here is, everyone here I think is pretty familiar with karst. I mean, if you've been around here a while, you know that it's basically a type of underground area wherein you have caves, fissures, you have all sorts of situations wherein you have problems as far as surface water contamination of the groundwater. Go ahead. The typical geology, and this is the primary difference, in areas that are non-karst, what happens with surface water, your rain, your runoff, it is filtered as it passes through the ground. Before it reaches the aquifer, contaminants are filtered out. In karst topography like we have here, the contaminants that are in the water can pass right through the fissures, the caves, the openings, and go right into the aquifer without being filtered. And whatever is on the ground surface is in the aquifer as well. And then once it enters that aquifer, it can pass for miles. We have cave systems in this county that have been documented for 7 or 8 miles, and we have systems wherein there are streams underground that are 8, 10, 12 feet wide, like small creeks. So that is the important thing about karst, is the potential for one small contamination type situation to mess up a lot of different area and a lot of different people's water supplies. Next. Sources of contamination related to pipeline construction. I'm not going to go into this a great deal, but first one I think was Steve mentioned, movement of equipment and materials. Then you have terrain and weather related situations. You have earth movement due to geologic changes, employee mistakes, equipment malfunctions. Next. Surface water impacts, and as I mentioned before, I won't be able in a short amount of time to cover everything, but I'm going to classify 2 different things here and speak just a little bit. Stream contamination from construction events and activities being one, and the other sedimentation, excess turbidity. Next. Transportation impacts, as Steve mentioned, what we're going to be seeing if this pipeline happens is over 1,000 trucks, large trucks, traveling our narrow, winding, steep back roads, crossing our little bridges, which basically weren't built for these long trucks to be crossing. And you do have the potential for accidents, problems. Next. This one you can't see very well. This is a tanker truck that ran off a bridge in an area like Monroe County, and it fell into the stream, and I think there were something over 1,000 gallons of contaminant that entered that stream. Fortunately, it's a surface stream. This was not in karst area. They were able to put in the appropriate berms downstream and were able to clean it up. So this was easy compared to what we might run into. Next. Stream impacts. As I mentioned before, I'll talk about stream and groundwater, but they are interconnected. Temporary and long-term stream degradation from sedimentation. Sedimentation can have a lot of nasty effects on a stream, and you can read there as far as what it can do to the fish, how it can affect the potential for flooding, how it can increase water temperatures, and how it can mess up trout streams as well. And we do have a couple of trout streams in the county that are of particular interest, Turkey Creek and South Fork with Potts Creek, which either one of these alternatives does cross. Next. As far as sedimentation is concerned, this is a pipeline routing here, and the one that we're talking about in this county will be even wider and more devastating. And when you start talking about the routing here, what we have in Monroe County is a series of ups and downs with the pipeline. They want to be in the valleys as little as possible, so they will try to ride the ridges. And when they do that, they will descend, cross the streams, cross the valley bottoms, and go up the next one. Some of these hillsides are going to be above 25% in grade. That's how steep. In most areas of this country, you're not even allowed to do construction above 25% grade. So it's pretty easy to imagine when you have a steep situation like that and you have a big wide swath of excavation that if you have what we call a gully washer, that you can have thousands and thousands and thousands of contaminated water and sediment entering the stream, practically more water entering that stream from this type of runoff than would be the stream itself. So it would have a major, major impact. Next. Here is what I call a half-ass effort by one of the companies to prevent sedimentation in the stream. There is a requirement by the West Virginia Division of Environmental Protection that these streams be protected. And what they do, they require that berms be put along, curtains they call them. Well, unfortunately, as I'll speak to just in a few minutes, the DEP does not do their job. And that is a problem area as well. Next. Operational activities. The companies tell us, trust us. We don't make mistakes. A 2013 independent analysis of federal records revealed that since 1986, oil and gas pipeline incidents have resulted in 532 deaths, more than 2,400 injuries, and more than $7.5 billion in damages. No problem. Next. Stream crossing issues. There are a number of streams that will be crossed, which I'll mention in a minute, but you do have a lot of things that are involved there. And I spoke on the issue there of protecting the stream during the construction. But one thing that happens with these companies, they get certain allowances, so to speak. They can request variances so that they don't have to fully adhere to the regulatory guidelines. And I'll speak with about the DEP again here in a minute, but they're only required to file general standards and specifications in the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement process. Our previous speaker, Joe, spoke about that a little bit. One thing, I have studied several environmental impact statements, and there's a very severe lack of specificity as far as how they're going to be doing these things. How are they going to protect our streams? Next. West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, Division of Water and Waste Management. They are required under the Clean Water Act to protect our streams. They have state water pollution control permits that are involved, and they unfortunately have failed miserably. Next. This has been showing up in the last year. Last year, the federal government, the Environmental Protection Agency, had to come into West Virginia and take over because the West Virginia DEP did not enforce the stream regulations. There is a lawsuit presently underway for this to happen again. So if they're not going to protect our streams, who is? I guess it's us. Next. Possible impact streams, and I may have missed a few. If you will let me know, I'll put them on the next time. Wolf Creek, Indian Creek, Hands Creek, Laurel Creek, Hunter Branch, Burnside Branch, North Fork of Potts Creek, and the streams I mentioned a while ago that are brook trout streams, Turkey Creek and South Fork of Potts Creek. Next. Groundwater impacts, as separate from surface water, but remember what I said a while ago, they are interconnected. Contaminants in underground streams can pass several miles. You have health hazards that are involved in the construction process. You have loss of water quality, loss of water yield and pressure. Next. And one thing that I'm particularly concerned about, I've taken hundreds of water samples in this county, and a lot of them have related to Peters Mountain. I am particularly concerned about the aquifer under Peters Mountain. The indications to me, in my years, and I worked 5.5 years with the health department here, is that there is one huge aquifer under Peters Mountain that continues. Peters Mountain is a 52-mile long mountain, and I believe that that aquifer underneath that mountain passes for many, many miles. What that means is one contamination event could impact that whole aquifer. And as we saw a while ago, cleaning up an aquifer is a terribly difficult process. Next. Source water protection area. Source water protection areas are designated areas for public water supplies. For example, if it's a spring coming out of the side of Peters Mountain, there will be a certain amount of acreage around that spring which should be protected from contamination from whatever source contaminants might be. And that is part of our regulatory guidelines that they be protected. Next. All of the source water protection areas within Monroe County listed below rely on Peters Mountain springs for their water supply. Town of Union source water protection area has springs on Peters Mountain. They also have wells. And the pipeline, the second pipeline that is proposed, passes on the boundary and through part of that source water protection area. Gap Mill source water protection area is a few miles away from where it crosses Peters Mountain. And then the red sulfur PSD, as you probably read in the newspaper, the first proposal that came out, it definitely was a major concern there. Red sulfur 4,000, Town of Union over 1,000 people or services on it. I'm not sure what the Gap Mills level is now, but we're probably talking somewhere close to between 5,500 and 6,000 different sources of water that are dependent upon the Peters Mountain water source. Next. Source water protection area. Here is something that I think is very important. This is from the Groundwater Protection Plan of the West Virginia Rural Water Association. The Rural Water Association has been involved with the protection of water and trying to get regulatory agencies involved and also trying to bring about regulatory guidelines for a number of years. They state here that the source springs for red sulfur, PSD, the Town of Union, and Gap Mills are all located on Peters Mountain. But the important thing there, they say during dry periods, the source of their groundwater likely becomes deeper zones within the mountain's fractured bedrock. That is one continuous underground aquifer, possibly. And if that aquifer is contaminated, it's going to be major problems. And they say at the bottom, obviously key to protecting the sources of drinking water in Monroe County would be to focus on strategies for managing land use on Peters Mountain. Managing land use on Peters Mountain to me is no pipeline on Peters Mountain. Next. Okay, Safe Drinking Water Act. This one, we got some county commissioners here, and I bring this up because I just read there that basically an attorney had stated that our county commission really has no regulatory authority here. Well, the Clean Water Act, there's something called federal preemption, and that basically means that federal government can override any state or local laws or regulatory guidelines. Except there are a few laws that they can't override. One of them is the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act is a very important regulatory guideline. One section of the Clean Water Act is the Safe Drinking Water Act, which applies to public water supplies. And it states on their website, EPA encourages states, tribes, and communities to use the information from mandated source water assessments to protect the delineated water protection areas from identified pollution sources of major concern. They could be, well, they could be lessened flow rate. I'm sure some of you here are familiar with when, and I ran out this, they have been sadly lacking, the ones that I've looked at. Next. Groundwater cleanup is a very difficult and expensive process. As I mentioned before, aquifers are complex structures, nooks, crannies, openings, holes, and you can't get a large underground a team of volunteers to go down in the cave systems to clean this stuff up like you would with some type of surface water situations. And the technology has limitations. Next. I'm going to speak just a minute on the environmental impact statement, and Joe spoke on it before me. I've studied a number of these over the years. I had my environmental consulting business at one time, and as I mentioned before, I found them to be very incomplete and very lacking in specifics. And we, a group of us, I taught an environmental impact statement last Tuesday in
Monroe County, and I can commend them for that strongly. Okay. Uh, Water supply and sanitation. The original route proposed by the Mountain Valley Pipeline travels through the protected watershed of the Red Sulphur Public Service District, as we've heard. Its route goes dangerously close to the most sensitive zone of critical concern north of Peterstown, and it's only a few hundred yards from the headwaters of Rich Creek. The original route takes it, the alternative route takes it through the protected watershed of the Union area, effectively potentially compromising the water supply of the residents who are served by it. Now, the reason I say that is because the second route we have is just that. It's an alternative route. We don't know which route they may take. Now, we have talked to those who've been experienced with FERC and also with gas pipelines. They may lead you to believe that they're going to follow one route, and later in the process, at the last minute, they may choose another route. And so we have to be vigilant on all these routes. We've heard from Jerry Pitzer of the Red Sulphur PSD that the excessive turbidity, which includes silt, dirt, sludge, resulting from such a massive excavation, could potentially compromise the clean water supply of over 4,000 people there. It has the same potential for compromising the water supply in the Union area with, we heard, 1,000 people or more here. Same problem. They just traded one protected watershed area for another. Without a continuous safe supply of safe, potable, drinkable water, entire communities can face the real threat of waterborne illnesses such as dysentery, typhus, giardia, E. coli contamination, and those are just a few. There are many waterborne illnesses that we potentially are at risk from. Okay. Next is pollutants. Okay. The construction process itself brings numerous potential serious health concerns to the area it impacts. Construction of this process will be on such a mammoth scale that significant pollutants into the surrounding environment will be inevitable. Typical pollutant emissions during the construction of a pipeline segment, primarily from very large-scale equipment and machinery, include carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, nitrous oxides, sulfur dioxides, trisodium phosphate, and benzene. Ingestion or exposure of these can result in serious health issues, including cancer. Benzene is probably the most insidious and notorious. Benzene exposure, for example, has a high incidence of lymphoma, leukemia, and bladder cancer. As Dale mentioned, due to the karst geology of Monroe County, if pollutants enter in one area, they can very well end up 5, 10, 20 miles away in another area, in someone else's well or public drinking supply. We cannot eliminate human error. If this construction process comes through Monroe County, accidents will happen. It is inevitable. There is no perfectly safe project that never has an accident. It is inevitable. Many of these chemicals have very long half-lives, some requiring decades to degrade. When leached into local water supplies, you, your children, your grandchildren may be exposed to these insidious, potentially cancer-causing chemicals for many years to come. There's probably no one in this room that didn't hear about the tractor trailer that went into Anthony Creek a couple of months ago. Everybody knew about that. 12,000 people had no water. Who would have thought that could happen? But it did. Accidents happen. Now, fortunately, their problem was a temporary problem. It was fixed. This pipeline, and if the second pipeline comes through here, this will be a permanent problem. This will be ours forever. So those things we have to think about. Traffic. Heavy traffic from tractor-trailer trucks will pose another public safety concern. It has been calculated it will take 1,000 or more tractor-trailers just to transport the large pipes for these projects. It's unlikely that our country roads can tolerate this kind of heavy use without significant damage. Many of our roads are already narrow and without safe shoulders, not designed for this type of industrial traffic. It is likely that large volumes of heavy trucks will further degrade our roads, creating more unsafe conditions. Those most likely to be at risk are young, inexperienced drivers, especially school-aged children, and the elderly. The large trucks themselves on our narrow roads will pose a high risk of causing accidents with other drivers. Again, those most likely to be at risk are the youngest drivers and the elderly. And lastly, we cannot ignore the risk of catastrophic failure. And I really wish, I had a fellow in my office the other day who is a welder. He teaches welding. He has 30-some years experience in welding. He brought me a paper with lots of specifications about constructing gas pipelines. And when he talked to me about all these things, because he had the opportunity to talk to the people who constructed the Celanese pipeline, it was scary, really scary. And what I'm talking about is the corners they cut to save money and put the public at risk. Every year, hundreds of gas pipelines explode. Most recently, just a few months ago, a pipeline ruptured and exploded in Brooks County, West Virginia. This created a massive explosion and fire. Just a few months ago, a Mississippi pipeline ruptured, causing another massive explosion and fire. In 2012, in Sissonville, West Virginia, a 20-inch pipeline ruptured and exploded, creating a massive explosion and fire. It hurled debris and shattered windows miles away. How many saw that on the internet or on the news? That was a 20-inch pipeline. That's less than half the size of the one that we're talking about here. Less than half. The heat was so intense from that fire that it destroyed all surrounding homes, melted asphalt, and melted guardrails. This line was less than one-half the size of the Mountain Valley Pipeline. The first route of the Mountain Valley Pipeline is less than a mile from James Monroe High School, a nursing home, and a church. Some of your children and grandchildren may attend that high school. The alternative route is not far from where you are sitting right now. It comes right down through the Knobs area, Salt Sulphur, and Wakeland. In my opinion, this reflects a disregard for public safety by the EPQ Corporation. Now our next speaker is going to talk to you about public safety concerns